Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 1421 LFG. Looking for Gorgons. Sitting at the desk of her small study, Monique hid her head in her hands. Staring at the papers, she could only lament about how nothing was working out. Of course, it wasn't that easy. She was so happy when she got the quest to get holy armaments, and it only said to find a blacksmith and epic Olympian silver. It wasn't as easy as it was for Lydia, but Mike had really suffered to procure the materials for his divine quest. She had celebrated too early. Seth and the metal were the easy part. Finding the Gorgon was a headache. Monique had already exhausted all her sources. Well, the three she knew. Minas Mar had no dungeon known to have Gorgon monsters or a Gorgon boss under its control. There were also no reports about such a beast. Yesterday, she had visited the Bryce, from the Adventurer Guild. The Holy Land and the Abyss were a vast land filled with dungeons, and the guild had a good overview of most dungeons in general. Despite the great number of dungeons, the guild had no dungeon that fit either. Not just on Earth, Bryce, the leader of the guild on Earth, also had no immediate information about any Gorgon dungeons in different worlds. However, she probably couldn't blame him, his rank was just too low to access that kind of info. Today, she had visited Simon from the System Church to ask whether the church might have information. But this was an even more complicated matter. Since Krina pulled out, Minas Mar had its own congregation of the System Church. This allowed the independence, but it also meant that there was now a rift between the System Church of Earth and that of Krina. Even if they managed to keep some connections stable, since Samuel, the saint, was revived and built by Seth, Simon didn't have full access to Krina's info, as he used to in the past. I do know that there are some dungeons with Gorgons in Krina, but I can't remember where exactly. Even if I could tell you the world, I wouldn't recommend traveling to Krina at this time. Pons is currently fortifying his power to become Crown Prince. If he finds out you and Seth are in Krina, he might try something, the priest had warned her. None of their allies were able to give her the info, and their own network didn't have any either. This would have been the perfect moment for a divine revelation, but nothing happened. Probably because getting the materials fresh was actually Seth's requirement. The soul of a Gorgon wasn't actually needed to make the Aegis, as far as Monique understood it. The blacksmith could have just bought the leather from the auction house. She would pay for it, too. Although Gorgons were usually above level 100, they were not inherently legendary. The leather couldn't be that expensive if there was any on the auction house. Alas, Seth wanted to hunt one with her together and harvest her leather and soul fresh. She also understood that this was the most ideal option. But what other options were there? She went over it in her mind. Unless Athena told her, she wouldn't find a Gorgon on Earth, she had already contacted anyone that would have known. Simon no longer had access to the specific location of a fitting dungeon or monster, and even if he did, traveling to Krina seemed dangerous. Bryce was also a dead end. He didn't have the authority to get the info she needed, and what he had was not helpful. As she mulled over it, she could think of two more sources who may know. One was Paolo. The angel summoner and his angel came from a world outside the system, and he had wandered a bunch of worlds in between. Maybe he knew, but even if he did, would he know the way there and back? Traveling across the pathworks without proper tech seemed chaotic and unreliable. Even the System Church's teleport, which spat you out at a randomized location when you were an Orihuma, at least got the world right. The last option she thought of came to her as a brainwave. Pararian. Not only was it a world that was overrun and struggling with a dungeon, it was also one of the few foreign worlds connected to Earth where she could travel with ease. Most importantly, Athena had given her the divine quest while Monique was in Pararian. Maybe this had a meaning? Apart from Pararian, there was also the world with the dark elves she heard of, but chances to get good info from that were slim. Their contact there was gone. Following her sudden intuition, the chosen of Athena quickly called Jane. Jane had been their primary ambassador. Unlike her, she had actually listened to all the nonsense those representatives and nobles droned on about. Jane? Monique asked, moderately excited, when the other would pick up her call. Monique? Do you know what time it is? Why are you calling me this late at night? The disheveled merchant asked with a cranky voice. The picture in the orb looked like she was in bed. Oh, sorry, I didn't notice that it was already this late, but since you already picked up, I have a question. While we were in Pararian, did you hear about a Gorgon dungeon or a roaming one? The spear demon asked directly. Ugh, is this about the armor that's being made for you? She asked, annoyed, but took a moment to think. I think I vaguely remembered someone complaining about a monster that petrified their Titan pilots. But I don't know whether that was a Gorgon. I can contact our people in Gula tomorrow to get some details. Is that enough? She asked, tired. Yes. Thank you. Monique thanked her enthusiastically. A beast that petrified people was the closest she got to finding a Gorgon, so far. There were not that many beings that could just petrify people. Apart from the Gorgon, Monique had only heard of the basilisk. In her opinion, there was at least a 50/50th chance it was a Gorgon. And if it was, then there was the problem of having to get there. Seth had said he wanted to come along to hunt the Gorgon, but would he come along to a different world, governed by a semi-magical feudalistic state? Monique had made enough annoying experiences in Perarian to know that they would leave them alone. Maybe they could go and travel in secret? They didn't have to mention that the technically acting head of state was visiting. That could be an idea, yet. Mulling over it, the chosen of Athena was mumbling into the night. The next morning, Monique immediately went to the blacksmith's workshop but ended up before closed doors. The door was tightly locked. Seth is forging again. The door has to stay closed because of the effects some of the forging ballads have, a voice mentioned as a friendly reminder from behind her. Whedon had noticed her standing at the door when he went to enter his own workshop. Oh. I see, thank you. How long do you reckon this will take? She asked, a little hesitant. It was the first time she found the workshop door locked, so she didn't really know what to do now. Arim, since he had been working on legendary items lately, I guess at least 1 hour. Depending on size and complexity, longer, the dwarf gave his guess. Go do something else. I will give you a call when the door is open again, the dwarf promised her. Monique hesitated for a moment but agreed in the end. At this point, there was nothing more she could do to move her quest forward. She had to wait for Jane to get the confirmation and for Seth to finish forging. Since there was nothing else, Monique decided to go to the training room to practice her spear arts. Chapter 1422 TFG Training for Gorgons. She was using a practice spear to repeat the various movements of her spear technique before transitioning into the spear arts of Athena, which she had learned upon becoming her chosen player. Monique's spear arts were specialized in defense, counters, which was the reason she originally gained the class of Turtle Warrior. Her fighting style was a shell, while the tip of her spear was like the head of a snapping turtle, fast and taking advantage of any opening. Her class had changed to Aegis Warrior when she received the blessing. Her own fighting style was based on the capabilities of normal humans. The spear techniques that came with the new class operated on the same principles, but incorporated the powers of skills and magic. Overall, it was slightly more aggressive in attacks, while using temporary barriers and attack skills to make up for the opening created when attacking more proactively. Cost, duration, and cooldown of these skills became very little compared to their effectiveness, but they were hard to use. Weaving in skills to cover weakness and improve attacks, all at the same time, while fighting in an potentially deadly fight, took a lot of nerve and proficiency. Monique was confident in her nerves, but it took a lot of practice to master the fighting style perfectly. Especially since she had to overcome and evolve her habits from her original training. If she were honest, she had not given her all in mastering this new fighting style until now. Monique was used to fighting with just the spear, but about a third of the moves of Athena's fighting style needed a shield. The spear demon had not gone the distance until now. After training her own techniques for an hour and those of Athena for another, she walked to the rack of practice equipment and picked up a shield. If Seth was really going to create an Aegis for her, and the Aegis was an equipment that could swap between a shield, a breastplate, and a cloak, her potential fighting style would become much more varied. She was going to such great lengths to create the Aegis, it would have been childish to insist on not accepting this change. Maybe clinging to something close to her family's style had been childish from the start, but that couldn't be helped now. After receiving so many blessings and going to such great lengths, she had to prove herself worthy. If she couldn't make use of the Aegis and still clung to her ways, what was the point in finding a Gorgon and making such great armor? Sweat was streaming down her back as she practiced for hours, absorbed in incorporating the skills and techniques to their fullest potential. There was no way to master it in one day, but she decided not to stop until she made satisfactory progress. In the middle of a set of movements, the door to the training room suddenly opened. Monique finished the set before looking to see who had entered. It was a face she had not seen often, but she could put a name to it, thanks to the recent party. Paolo? Did you also come to practice? She asked, using the not as wet spot of the drenched towel around her shoulders to wipe the sweat from her forehead. Oh, Lady Lust. Why yes. The Tower Master gave me these gauntlets the other day, and I'm practicing with them before I test them in the Holy Land, the priest explained nervously, holding up his hands covered in purple crystalline gauntlets. Wow, those look really cool. What do they do? She asked, intrigued, looking at them like a work of art. Still nervous, but slowly becoming more confident, Paolo told her about the cestus of Amicus and about his attempt to incorporate it into his fighting style. Do you need a sparring partner? I could use an opponent, if you are up for it, the chosen of Athena offered. Paolo hesitated, surprised by the sudden offer. Is it okay? I would want to hurt you accidentally, the angel summoner voiced his doubts. The next moment, Monique had donned her full armor, but kept the practice shield and spear. Although it was not a legendary set, Monique's armor was made of custom relics. Ha! Let's see you try, she said confidently. In the afternoon, a couple of hours later, she had had enough of using Paolo as a punching bag and ended her training, leaving the bruised priest behind in the practice room. Whedon still had not called, but she decided to check in on the situation in the workshops after washing up. She checked the door to Seth's workshop first, but it was still locked. Facing the closed door, she popped her head in Whedon's and Hone's workshop, where the two dwarves were working on their own projects. Did he come out even once in the past 6 hours? She asked, perturbed and slightly puzzled, once she had the attention of the two. It was roughly that long ago since she came by to meet Seth about the potential Gorgon Jane found. Nope, but it's not really unusual he might be done but forgot to unlock it. But when I look at the time, if he was done at this point, he would have gone to eat something for lunch, Whedon theorized. It must be a big project then, or something complex that just takes its time. Considering he has all the forging corrections and speed buffs, I would guess it is the latter. Hone joined the conversation. His reasoning seemed sound. How long do you think it will take then? Monique asked for a rough estimate. Sorry, no idea. At this point, he could come out any minute, or stay in there until late evening. Depends on what he is working on, Whedon gave his verdict. Hone silently nodded beside him, agreeing with his guess. Monique's shoulders slumped. Then I will go and see whether Jane already has something new, the spear demon mumbled. Thanks, guys, she said as goodbye and left to give Jane a visit. The business administrator of Minas Mar was in her office, probably still busy catching up on the paperwork she had missed during the time they were away. No, I have not yet received an answer, Jane greeted her automatically, the moment she saw Monique enter her office. Although there was no news, it meant Jane had not forgotten, despite Monique calling her in the middle of the night. That's a shame, but thank you for asking for me, the chosen of Athena said with a smile. No problem. Was there anything else you wanted? Jane asked when Monique didn't immediately leave. Not really. Seth's door is closed, so I can't talk with him about the armor or the Gorgon, Monique trailed off. So you have nothing to do anymore and just lurk around here until what? Jane asked, her eyes not rising from the papers in her hands. Until Whedon calls me, or someone calls you about the Gorgon. Monique joked cheekily. Just joking, I'm leaving now, she said, a little downtrodden, and left the office. Jane didn't stop her. Thinking about what to do now, she suddenly had a great idea and decided to visit Link. She would get a surprise for Seth when the door finally opened again. She decided to also get something for Hone and Whedon. Chapter 1423 Sherd of Silver. Having sung the Ballad of Damage Reflection for almost 10 hours straight, Seth was finally able to put his hammer aside. This had taken way longer than the blacksmith had initially thought, despite having Cerberus help him. But it was finally done, he had just riveted the last ring. Now lying on his anvil was a finished sherd of plate and fine, riveted mail, completely forged from silver of Athena Promachos. This was the blacksmith's answer to the nature of the aegis. It would have been awkward to try and make a plate cuirass that could incorporate the aegis, turning into a breastplate, without looking awkward, but he also didn't want Monique to be left with a simple mail shirt when the aegis was a cloak, or a shield. This was why the blacksmith decided on a sherd of plate and chain, which mixed the superior protection of plate and the superior range of movement of mail. The sherd had over 300 smaller, slender metal plates woven into the chain. But they were not simply strapped in, they used the same technique as plate armor. They were all overlapping and articulate, preserving an optimal range of movement, while giving increased protection to key areas. In a certain sense, it was comparable to some brigandines, but using chain to keep the plates in place instead of fabric. But that was not the end of its special traits. It was normal for a male shirt to fall roughly to the middle of the thighs. At this point, Seth had incorporated teragis made of reinforced owl leather to the hem of the chain shirt, to mirror the makeup of Olympian armor like that of Athena, and further improve movability. During the whole process, the forging of wire, the forging of plate, the riveting and weaving, he had to sing without a break. He was glad he had Cerberus for the bending and cutting of the wire for the rings. Otherwise, it may have taken even longer. One thing was clear, he wasn't going to finish this today. It was already early evening. While Seth sat down to drink a weak healing potion to treat his sore throat, Sivri, as usual, unlocked the door of the workshop, in case somebody needed something from him in person. Knock knock. He was just done with his potion when there was a knock on the door. He set the empty bottle aside and looked at the door. "You can come in." "The door is open," the blacksmith called, his voice mostly recovered from the strenuous singing. Coming in were Monique, Whedon, and Hone. While the dwarves had their nosy gazes scan the workshop, Monique looked at him with a smile. "Here, I brought you food from the kitchen," she said proudly and presented Seth with several dishes freshly prepared by Link, preserved by her inventory. The blacksmith happily accepted the kind gesture. "Thank you, I didn't have the chance to go for lunch today," he thanked her and began eating the dishes she had placed on the workbench beside him. "I know, I have been kinda waiting for your door to open since noon," Monique revealed. "You did?" he asked between bites. "I'm sorry. The armor took longer than expected," he said, pointing at the plate and mail shirt still lying on the anvil. The finely woven rings were glistening in the light like knitted silver under the golden sun. "You did that alone within a day?" Whedon gasped. Hone nodded beside him, but didn't say anything. The dwarves had not said a word so far, as their eyes had been glued to said armor since they entered the workshop. "Well, I had Cerberus help with shaping the rings after I made the wire," the blacksmith admitted that he had help, which didn't help the two dwarves grasp how he managed to finish a full chain and plate shirt within a day. "Is that mine?" Monique asked, her eyes were now also glued to the armor that glistened like a pile of electrum coins. Seth had his mouth full, so he simply nodded. "Can I try it on?" she asked. Seth swallowed. "Sure, go ahead. I tailored it for you, so it should fit you perfectly. If there are any places it doesn't, tell me," he said before he continued munching away. Although there were clasps in the front to open and close the shirt, there was no actual reason, since Monique simply donned it using the system options. Once worn, Monique looked like she was armored like an alligator. A mechanical, cybertronic, silver golden alligator. "Oh wow, it feels really comfortable. It barely feels like it is of metal," she mumbled. Enthusiastically. She kept moving around and struck various poses to see how it fit. Meanwhile, Seth finished his food. "But does this design mean I won't need a breastplate? What if I'm using the Aegis otherwise?" she asked. Although she seemed to like the full freedom of movement, she did have some concerns about the defense. "You could also wear a different breastplate for that time, but that won't be necessary, right Run?" Seth deferred the question to the golem, putting aside the empty dishes. The master enchanter was going to be in charge of the shirt's external enchantment. To preserve the range of movement and the capability to change to the Aegis in an instant, the shirt was the only piece of armor, so Seth decided not to double down on the Olympian enchantments. Run's suggestion was simply too good to pass on. "Exactly. I have created an enchantment I call the Arcane Cuirass. It allows the user to summon a barrier that covers the torso and mirrors the non-legendary traits of the item, practically doubling the layer of protection in one go," the golem explained proudly. This meant that the conjured cuirass, so to speak, would have the same 40% damage reflection as the chain, as well as other effects the shirt would gain from the soul of the warrior's iron defense. What it would not inherit were the legendary traits. For the shirt, he was actually quite happy with the legendary effect that had manifested after he finished forging. Aside from the additional 50% power to skills and spells, the silver carried Athena's defense. The effect raised the base defense by 25% and doubled the defense of all barrier skills. It fit perfectly with the planned enchantment and confirmed Seth's suspicion that the legendary effects were not fixed. They changed based on the item he made from the silver to fit whatever armor piece it ended up as. Thinking of the other pieces reminded Seth of something. Oh, right, here, try these on, too. The blacksmith had suddenly remembered that he also had the finished helmet and leg armor in his inventory. Monique had not shown up since he started working on the armor, so this was the first chance to show them to her. Although the shirt was not finished, he looked forward to seeing the pieces together on the model. As he handed them to Monique, he went over the power of the individual pieces, and Monique became visibly giddy as he went on about the power. She could hardly wait to put them on. The moment the helmet found its place on her head, Nyctamine appeared on her shoulder. "Hello, Monique," the owl greeted her by her name. "Hello, Nyctamine. Nice to meet you again," the chosen greeted back with a smile. "Can I go try them out?" Monique asked, ready to run out of the workshop to test the various skills and effects Seth had mentioned. "Leave the shirt here, it's not finished," the blacksmith demanded back the shirt, before the chosen of Athena could run off with the unfinished product. "Also, it's getting late, so if you intend to test them in the field, you should wait for tomorrow," he added when Monique gave it back to him. Since there were no problems with the size, the shirt fell directly into the hands of Run. The sleepless golem would be able to enchant the armor overnight, so Seth could finish it in the morning of the next day. Although it was a shirt of mail and plate, Seth was not nearly as afraid of it when it came to soul forging as he was of the soft feathers of the helmet. When forging the soul, it would only be a repeating pattern, he wouldn't actually have to replicate every little ring and plate. "Don't worry, I'm just going to the training room to play around a little." "All right, have fun," the blacksmith sent her off. "Are you finishing for today?" Whedon asked out of curiosity, seeing that Seth had handed the shirt to Run. "No, I think we'll finish a few weapons for the Cloud Continent before I sign off," the blacksmith said after a moment of thought. He had neglected that aspect of their plan a little, since the armor production became a little busy. "Oh, so you are cursing some weapons now? Can I watch?" Hone asked, intrigued. "If you have nothing better to do, I see no reason why not," Seth said with a shrug. There was no risk in watching him etch demonic poems. After all, he wasn't singing or reciting them. At least not loudly. A couple of hours later, the blacksmith finished early and went to his quarters. Chapter 1424 Skin of Athena. When Seth returned to the shop the next morning, the fully enchanted shirt was neatly placed on one of the workbenches in the workshop. Run had done as he promised and completed the work overnight. What was left was for the spirit blacksmith to forge the prepared soul, enchant it, and infuse it into the shirt. This was not too tall a task. The soul of the warrior's iron defense had already been waiting for this very moment. The soul of the warrior's iron defense was the essence of all skills that raised endurance, defense, and resistances. This soul actually stuck out a little from the rest of them, because it not only had a couple of skills and one trait, but two. As one would expect, when taking 500 souls specialized in physical combat and taking all the skills concerning endurance, defense, and resistances, there was a lot. Almost every class had passive and active skills to improve their survivability in melee combat. The first trait was Solid Physique, which raised overall defense by 25% and all common resistances by 30%. Less common ones by 15%. Less common effects were, for example, curses or mental effects. This was slightly more restricted but similar to one of the skills of Tekker, which allowed him to raise all his resistances, which was an absolutely broken class skill, in Seth's opinion. Not that someone with the ability to rip the souls of considerably weaker opponents right out of their bodies had any right to complain about how broken someone else was. The second trait was Adaptive Defense. Following the principle of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, it granted a base bonus of 10% to overall defense and 5% to resistances. Every time one was hit by a certain kind of damage, a counter would be created that raised defense by another 5% and resistances by 2.5%. The counter would persist until one exited combat. Depending on how resilient the user was, this meant one's defense in a battle would rise until they were immune to their opponent's attacks. This was especially practical when talking about damage over time. If, say, every tick of poison counted as an instance of damage taken, that would mean every tick would increase poison resistance by 2.5%. This was not the percentage of already existing resistance, but base resistance. Adding the two traits meant Monique would become immune to common kinds of damage after taking 130 hits within a single battle. Considering what value Monique started with, it would potentially take a lot less. This kind of trait would have also fitted Bulko very well, who was able to share part of his resistance and defense with allies, but the priest insisted on his setup of dedicated armor sets. Lastly, the soul also came with 2 active skills. Active skill, Roar of the Tank, no cost, cooldown, 15 minutes. You become immobile and immune to damage for the next 30 seconds, focusing all hostile attacks in a 50m radius onto yourself. Apart from the incredible range, it was a typical tank skill. It was just a shame that this did not mesh with the adaptive defense. The trait only worked when damage was received. Since the skill granted immunity to damage, there would be no counters. On the other hand, the skill worked like a charm with damage reflection. The effect worked on the damaged before it was inflicted. This meant that during the duration of the skill, 40% of incoming damage would be reflected, and the remaining 60% would be negated. Although that only worked for armor pieces actually enchanted with it, it was crazy to think that the ultimate defensive skill of a tank was potentially turned into a 100m diameter of self-harm for the enemy. The second skill was Iron Defense, which would raise endurance by 100 and defense by 50% for 5 minutes, but half defense for 2 minutes after it ended. It was a potentially life-saving skill, but one needed to know when to use it. As mentioned the other day, the forging itself was actually the easier part. It took him roughly an hour to get the soul in shape. Fortunately, the soul only had to look the part on the surface. The bigger challenge was going to be the infusion this time. But before that, he still had to enchant it. In the designing phase, he had actually deliberated using an automaton circuit on the soul, so the item itself could react to attacks and active skills, but he decided against it. He trusted Monique's skill and judgment in combat. Instead, he chose basic Olympian defense. It was the opposite of basic Olympian attack. It increased the multiplier of physical and magical defense per endurance or willpower by 25%, meaning that it raised the base defense of the wearer, on which most other effects were based. It did half of what Athena's defense already did, making Seth curious whether these were going to interact with each other. Once the complicated circuit was engraved, the soul was ready for the last hurdle of the piece, infusing it. When infusing a soul into a fabric or a mail shirt, he had to make sure to infuse it into every fiber or link in this case. Still, it was nothing compared to the time when he exhausted himself to create the bronze for Hellion. Soon, the chain and plate shirt, fitted with its new soul, found its way into the water of Styx to be reborn. Ding! You have finished a special item. Plus 100p of power of existence. Ding! A synergy of materials has changed the effects of your item. The shirt floating in the water glittered in the light of the workshop. For a moment, it glowed up, and Seth got the familiar notifications. The blacksmith didn't hold back and immediately appraised the shirt to see what had changed. Skin of Athena. Special. Regalia of Athena set 1/X. Physical DEF, 2300. Mag, Def, 2600. Durability, 9000. 1 Athena's defense ++. 2 plus 50% to the power of skills and magic. 3 trait solid physique. 4 trait, adaptive defense. 5 40% damage reflection. 6 active skill, arcane cuirass. 7 active skill, Athena's last stand. 8 active skill, adamant defense. 9 active skill, Athena's storm cloak. Set effect regalia of Athena, to be decided. A mail shirt radiating Athena's splendor, forged as part of her regalia by Master Smith, the first Master Blacksmith and Master Enchanter of Earth. Using a special metal and cured materials in addition to his mysterious means, Master Smith made the ideal armor for a chosen of Athena. Requirements: Blessing of Athena, Master Smith. The blacksmith's eyes scanned over the options. The first thing he realized was that basic Olympian defense had been absorbed into Athena's defense, making it Athena's defense ++. The effect now added 60% to base defense and doubled the defense of barriers. The remainder of the changes could be found among the whopping 4 active skills the shirt had received. Athena's last stand used to be Roar of the Tank. The synergy with Silver of Athena Promachios has doubled the duration and now focused all hostile attacks on the user, without restriction to area. Adamant defense had developed from Iron defense. It now raised endurance by 100 points, willpower by 100 points, and doubled defense for 5 minutes. The duration of the price had halved, now only causing defense to be halved for 1 minute instead of 2. Lastly, there was Athena's storm cloak. It resembled arcane cuirass, which had not changed. The skill cloaked the user in a small snowstorm. It hides the user and averts ranged attacks. It was a real head-scratcher where this skill came from, until Seth remembered that he had used the leather of the giant blizzard owl for the terrages. He wouldn't have expected it to be enough to generate an effect, but apparently, Athena's affinity for owls was greater than he expected, despite correcting it upward after seeing nictamine. Having explored the powers of the finished piece, he placed it in his inventory. He could not spend all day on this. It was still morning, and he had more planned for today. The next stop was the tailor workshops. The blacksmith wanted to check whether the gloves or boots were done, so he could continue on those. Chapter 1425 Crowd of Craftsmen. When Seth came to the tailor workshops, he found them empty. Well, not all of them. Naddle's workshop, where he was looking for his gloves and boots, was currently deserted. Looking around, he found the small crowd of craftsmen at Nico's workshop. Great work! What a fascinating cut! To think such fabric exists, he heard the murmur and praising of the crowd before he saw what they were talking about. At the center of the shop stood a female dress form displaying a splendorous cloak. The fabric was pure white, like snow, but carried an aura like honey. It was glowing from the inside out and looked incredibly soft to the touch. The blacksmith knew immediately what he was looking at, even before he used his appraisal skill. This had to be the robe Nico made from the threads of puffles. The threads of searing light that the Eye-Visor had used to smother the legendary Lich to death. The tailor had finally managed to weave it into a fabric of his own. Without any additional enchantment, the cloak added 75% to the overall power of the wearer under open skies, improved support and light magic by 125%, damage dispersion, and held the free skill to double the cloak's defense for 5 minutes. Although it was conditional, becoming almost double as strong under the open sky was tremendous for anyone, but what made it 100% a supporter item was the second option. Improved defense and damage dispersion were nice to have, but paled in comparison to the fabric's special effects. Really a fine work, the blacksmith also praised from the back, scaring the crowd that was focused on the robe. Seth, did you come to see my masterpiece? Nico asked confidently. No, sorry. I came to see whether Naddle was done with the gloves and boots I ordered for Monique's armor, the tower master said apologetically. Nico visibly deflated when it became clear that Seth had not even heard about his big announcement. Your items are ready, I have them at my workshop, Naddle answered, friendly. Sorry that nobody was present, but Nico was about to explain his work process for the fabric, the old tailor explained with his warm smile. Oh, really, no need to hurry then. I will also listen, the blacksmith said readily. Although he was not a tailor by class, he was a craftsman in sewing. He held a certain interest in fabric materials, even if he didn't have the skill to weave for himself. Well, all right, then I will continue, Booz said, regaining his drive and beginning to talk about his journey. Apparently, it had not been as easy as simply taking the thread and weaving it. Of course, he tried that at first, but the resulting fabric was actually harmful. Although it had roughly double the power you can see in my final product, any item made from it would also continuously cause light elemental damage to the wearer, which had an almost curse-like quality to reduce maximum health over time, the tailor said, as if cautioning the others not to try using it like that. The only other one in the room capable of weaving a special rated thread would have been Naddle, so it was probably just theatrics. Theatrics that didn't work on Seth. While Nico talked about how he used various combinations of Puffle's thread and his own magic threads to create the fabric for the robe, Seth was thinking in a different direction. A pure fabric could more than double overall power and triple the power of light and support magic. Seth was not bothered by the negative side effects. Unlike the tailor, who was only considering his individual pieces, Seth thought of the whole picture. To benefit from it the most, the user would have to be a healer capable of using light magic, which usually also came with light affinity and resistances. On top of that, the wearer could also equip items to raise their light resistance. There was no negative effect on the fabric if the wearer was immune to light damage. Considering the power one could develop by stacking several items made of this, it made reaching an immunity to light damage worth it. Almost cheap, even, depending on the specializations of the wearer. Seth stashed that idea away for now, since he would have to see whether any of their healers, like Linry or Ferdinand, or maybe Angelique, were viable options for this approach. For now, he simply stood by and listened to Nico and his explanation. When the tailor was done, he followed Naddle to his workshop, where he received the finished owl leather gloves and boots. Looking at the finished items, Seth recognized once again that although Nico became a master earlier, Naddle's techniques were superior. Both items actually came with a skill, born from expertly choosing pieces and sewing the leather in a way to channel its inherent powers. Apart from having the same effects as the Sky Dragon loafers, namely soft solace, supported ankles, and plus 30% movement speed, the boots carried Blizzard Lead, a skill that could create a strong cold wind, which would slow nearby enemies, while it allowed the user to leap high up into the air. The gloves had increased defense and held the Wind Fist skill, which could create a forceful gust in the direction of the strike and throw back opponents. Seth had only chosen the owl leather for its potential connection to Athena, but Nadal turned it into a contributing component. He expected nothing less from a master tailor. Having secured the boots and gloves, Seth left the tailor workshops again and made a detour to get lunch before he returned to his smithy. With these 2 pairs of items, he had everything he needed to finish the armor, except the aegis. But Monique said she already had a hint to find a Gorgon, so that was only a question of time. Until then, he had the pauldron, the gauntlets, and the armored boots to finish. If Monique had not found a Gorgon by then, he would continue working on Sky Dragon armor pieces. Although Kate had resolved herself to accept the armor, he had yet to hear from Lena whether she succeeded in convincing everyone. She still had time until he finished the armor. If the production of the Aegis got postponed, he was willing to reserve the materials for the full set, while making the items that were guaranteed. Thinking idle thoughts like that, he sorted the pieces he needed for the next piece of armor. With a plunk, the boots made of owl leather found themselves beside the anvil. A few clanks later, they had placed 4 ingots on the anvil. Seth started with the boots, because he already had the cuisses he adapted the knee guard to. The overall design of the armored boots differed a bit from the Greaves Sabaton Pauline combo he had used for the Sky Dragon armor. Inspired by the depiction of Olympian armor, Seth decided to make the greaves and knee guard in one piece, but also use his own armor experience to encase the calf for protection. Although Monique had said that she preferred the damage reflection, Seth had deliberated using the Ballad of Sierra, like the one he used on the Sky Dragon loafers, on her boots too. However, after Athena's skin revealed its potential, there was no more question about the forging ballad. The more armor pieces reflected damage, the higher the damage potential of Athena's last stand. Singing the familiar ballad, Seth forged the ingots into sheets and then started to shape the greaves. He was using a template he found online when looking through image archives. It was a version that was shaped like a stylized owl, with the head of the bird being the knee guard. First the right, then the left, then matching them. Time flew by as the 2 pieces of armor took shape. The finished parts were then attached to the boots. Although it was not necessary thanks to the system options, the boots could be opened and closed at the back of the calf to put them on or take them off. Although Seth doubted it was necessary, he could rarely see the future. It was best not to be 100% reliant on the system option. He always tried to leave an, albeit uncomfortable, way to use the items, even without the system. Soon, the base boots were done, and it was time for the enchantment. Chapter 1426 Plans. Originally, Seth wanted to use Olympian speed on the body of the boots, but that had changed. The nature of Silver of Athena Promachos had revealed itself upon completion of the boots, and it had changed again. Apart from plus 50% to the power of skills and magic, it now offered the effect Subduer of Winds. The effect not only raised the power of wind elemental attacks by 50%, but it also granted wind manipulation leave 5, the lower form of the ability of aerokinesis. Even with both boots granting the effect, Seth guessed that Monique would be able to use something around wind manipulation leave 7 at best. Its use in battle was ambiguous, but it would probably do well to increase her range of movement and support in aerial combat. But the skill was not the reason he decided to change the enchantment, it was the doubling of wind elemental attacks. Instead of speed, Seth chose Minor Olympian Wind, which was the Olympian version of an elemental enchantment. He had unlocked those at Enchantment, Master, Leave 3. It could add wind element to a weapon or increase the defense against it. What he hoped for by placing it on the boots was obvious. It wouldn't hurt Monique to have some non-spear related melee attacks. And who knew what synergies were possible with that? Maybe Seth lacked some sense of responsibility, and a more professional blacksmith would have chosen a more conservative combination, considering he was dealing with the special materials blessed by a great goddess. Maybe there was a little more to the reason for his blessing of Seth than just sharing the name. Although a synergy was an unstable outcome to count on, it was not as mad as one may think. After all, Seth had done a lot to raise his production-related fortune, especially to deal with the bones of Seth. His chances of getting a good outcome were never low. Once the boots were enchanted, it was already late. You are back early today. How's Monique's armor going? He was greeted by Mina when returning to their quarters. You aren't slacking on her armor, are you? Finn asked teasingly, since he was getting back home early more often. Nothing like that, it's just that I wouldn't have gotten home tonight at all if I had continued, the blacksmith said with a laugh as he plopped down on the couch between the two and stole a handful of popcorn from the bowl Finn was holding onto, earning him a mean glance from the fairy. What are we watching? He asked, looking at the action flick running on the screen. He once again appreciated that Delta had not lost technology, unlike Y City. When traveling in Aura, he had spent most of his time tirelessly grinding his skills, but now he would not know what to do in his free time if he couldn't enjoy movies and video games with Finn and Mina. Well, there was definitely something more fun the three could get up to, but none of them were nympho enough to do it in every waking minute they were together. You know, while you were having fun in the workshop, I and Finn also had some ideas, the cat girl revealed to him after they sat on the couch together for a while. Oh, really, and what are you two up to? Seth asked, prying his eyes from the TV and looking at her. Mina gave him a cheeky smile, while Finn had also looked up, grinning in anticipation, after emptying the popcorn bowl. For some reason, his heart started racing when he saw the two look at him like that. You know how Mike returned yesterday, right? She asked. Seth nodded. Her brother, the chosen of Mahis, had finally ended his quest and placed the gates in the unclaimed mountains, which were meant to divert the threat of the cybernetic monsters by siphoning them off-world. And Pip's birthday party is in a couple of days, Finn added, brimming with excitement. Seth nodded again. That was the reason he had prepared a staff together with Tord. Pip was going to come of age and be able to choose a class in the system. It also meant that the time for Seth to do good on his promise was drawing closer. What now felt like a long time ago, he had promised Pip that he would help her return to New Hope and lend her the power to set the place straight. He had compelled giants to protect the city, and in the meantime, the fleet of Epsilon had also settled in New Hope for a while. The fleet had now settled in Little Epsilon after they joined Minas Mar in the wake of the Greta tournament. That meant New Hope currently only had the giants and whatever defenses the fleet left behind. We think we should announce our engagement when everyone gathers for Pip's party, Mina finally got to the point. Seth's heart stopped for a moment. It came out of nowhere and surprised him, that was all. When the stupor wore off, he was actually happy that they had actively thought of when to announce it. But, wouldn't we steal Pip's limelight? It's her birthday. I feel like we would push ourselves in the foreground, Seth voiced his only doubt. Taking away the attention from the birthday child who was coming of age seemed unfair. No need to worry, I already talked about it with Pip. Finn exclaimed triumphantly. So Pip already knows about our engagement? The blacksmith asked, puzzled and concerned. Of course, he trusted Pip, but she was also a minor. Whether she could keep the secret seemed. Of course not. I just told her that there was a very important personal announcement we three wanted to make and asked for her permission, Finn elaborated her thoughtful scheme. At this point, they were at the mercy of Pip's trustworthiness. Even a minor would get what that kind of announcement would be. There is more, Mina quickly added, before he could completely recover from the series of surprises. What's next? The bard asked, taking a deep breath to prepare himself. We thought it would be nice if we married before setting off for the voracious cloud continent and have our honeymoon traveling in the exotic new land, his fiancée revealed their second idea. Seth turned into a pillar of salt as his heart stopped for a disconcertingly long moment. If they wanted to marry before Minas Mar started their march against the continent, that meant they were going to marry within the next month, if nothing got in the way of the schedule. Although Seth had asked Mina to marry him and then asked Mina and Finn with the absolute intention to marry them, he had never really given it much thought. Not that he really had the time to. Or maybe he had also distracted himself from it. However, suddenly facing a certain date in the near future, he was happy. Happy that they really wanted it, happy they wanted him to the point of asking for the ceremony just months after he asked them. Great, let's do it. But what are we doing about the ceremony? There's not much time left to prepare something big, and do we need a priest of a certain god? Do you guys have any preferences? The bard asked excitedly. You don't have to worry, we will take care of everything. You have to focus on making sure we can go on honeymoon on schedule, Finn answered proudly, slapping her moderate chest. As for the priest, Simon will suffice, I think. You don't mind having a marriage under the system god, right? Mina asked with a smile. Marriage under the system church was quite common for people in system worlds, who didn't explicitly follow any specific belief. I have no divine preference. Then I will leave those preparations to you, Seth said, a warm, fuzzy feeling filling his insides. Since we all agree, why don't we celebrate a little? Mina suddenly said seductively, pushing her soft body up against Seth. Although they didn't do it every waking minute, there was no reason not to do it as often as they wanted. Finn gave the movie a wistful look, but she wasn't going to be left behind. Chapter 1427 Athena's Sandal. This morning, Seth arrived late at the workshop, for obvious reasons. But he had taken a shower and was ready for a fresh day at the anvil. The agenda for today was to finish the boots. Well, the boots were done, what they lacked were their soles. For these, he had prepared 2 soles. Starting with the left boots, he brought out one of the soles he had refined from Tanamol's stash. It was called Soul of the Ranger's Fleet-footedness, which was the concentration of experiences and passive skills that raised agility and movement speed. It was a soul with a single trait, similar to Soul of Assassin's Fluid Evasion. The trait, Ranger's Step, raised movement speed by 25% and agility by 100 points. But those were not the interesting part. The trait's description also promised to raise reaction speed and decision-making in difficult terrain. This meant that there was less chance for her speed and movement to be impacted by the environment. It was not an effect that was guaranteed to be helpful in combat, but it was definitely useful when either fleeing or pursuing a target. Once he had forged it into a replica of the boot, he engraved it with basic Olympian stamina, which raised the multipliers for stamina and stamina recovery. He was sure it would be helpful to Monique, even if she was not going to be as much of a speedster as Phaenis. Since he had started late, it was already time for lunch when he finished the sole armament for the left boot. He had a quick lunch, eating a dish from his inventory before he continued with the second boot. For the right boot, Seth had the Soul of the Knight's Valiant Rush, which held the essence of active charging and movement skills. With how many classes specialized in physical combat and charging skills, this soul actually had 2 traits and a skill. The first trait was Aggressive Pursuit. It doubled speed and attack power when using a charging skill to attack an enemy. The second trait was called I-frames and negated 50% damage when charging, dodging, or dashing. Apart from the 2 traits, it also held a skill that benefited from the 2. Active skill, Valiant Rush, no cost, cooldown, 5 minutes. For ruin and the world ending. When things are dire, face death valiantly. Plus 400% movement speed for 30 meters. Plus 50% PHYS damage on the next attack. Plus 50% PHYS damage for every 10% health missing on the next attack. The massive increase in movement speed was the average effect of most charge skills, however, the additional attack was not always given, especially not to this degree. At maximum output, so when the user was at less than 10% health, the skill would raise physical attack damage by 6 times. Really, facing death valiantly. It could be the last desperate attack to take down an enemy, potentially perishing together. Seth had been especially satisfied with this soul, considering the traits and the skill, especially. For the right soul armament, he had chosen Olympian Speed, one of the enchantments he had unlocked with Enchantment, Master, Leave 1. The skills he had first unlocked had no modifiers like Basic or Minor, but they also only had the most basic effects. When supplied with mana, they could raise durability, or cutting power, or, in this case, speed. The more mana, the stronger the effects. In that regard, they were rather primitive. The blacksmith had found a couple of ancient enchantments that worked in a similar way, however, they all had a big drawback. The circuits were simple to a fault and had no safeties. Even if the effects rose with the power supplied, that didn't mean there was no limit to how much a circuit could take. Worst case scenario was that the enchantments would burn out and short circuit, lowering the item's durability and potentially detonating it together with the user. This weakness was not mitigated even when he used them on souls. However, the Olympian enchantment on level 1 was incomparable to those crude ancient ones. Although the blacksmith could barely start to understand the functions of the complex engravings, he was sure there were things like limits and safeties integrated. Still, Seth actually didn't know whether there was a limit to their power. Maybe he would be able to find out with this. Once he was done forging and enchanting the souls, he infused them and gave the pair of boots their baptism in the waters of Styx. Notifications rang as the boots glowed with power and were reborn. Both items had experienced some changes, but the biggest were in the skills of the right boots. Athena's Sandal, Right. Legendary. Boots of the Wind Waker set 1/2. Regalia of Athena set 1/X. Physical DEF, 1600. Mag, Def, 1900. Durability 8600. 1 Subduer of Winds. 2 plus 50% power on skills and spells. 3 40% damage reflection. 4 trait, Aggressive Pursuit. 5 trait, I-frames. 6 soft solace. 7 supported ankles. 8 plus 30% movement speed. 9 active skill, Athena's Pace. 10 active skill, Storm Kick. 11 active skill, Athena's Stride. Boots of the Wind Waker set 2/2. 1 active skill, Athena's Boreal Ascent. 2 active skill, Whirlwind Kick. Regalia of Athena set, to be updated. 1 of 2 boots following Athena's epitaph as Subduer of Winds. It was created by Master Smith, the first Master Blacksmith and Master Enchanter of Earth, in cooperation with Master Fadley. Imbued with the power to command the winds, they grant the wearer great agility. Requirements: Blessing of Athena, Master Smith. 2 things became immediately apparent: none of his Olympian enchantments appeared in name. Both of them had been changed with the synergies. The first he found was Olympian Speed, which had apparently turned into the active skill Athena's Pace. Athena's Pace was a very simple skill, but very powerful. At no cost, it doubled the current movement speed for 1 minute. Its cooldown was 5 minutes. Seth had to take a second look when reading the skill. It didn't add speed based on the base value, but doubled the current movement speed. No matter how many multipliers were already applied, it would double it. This meant any effect and skill that raised movement speed could be counted as doubled while the skill was active. For example, the skill Athena's Stride, which used to be Valiant Rush, would raise speed by 800%, or each boot would technically raise speed by 60% instead of 30%. Maybe there was also some power of Athena playing into the mix, but if Olympian speed always counted for current speed, that would be nuts. Seth needed a moment to come to terms with the revelation of how strong the first Olympian enchantments he had gotten could actually be. Looking for the Olympian Wind, he found the new skill Active Storm Kick. But that could be all. The skill only added 200% wind elemental damage to the next kick. Although it did offer a 30% armor penetration, he felt like this was too little even when it said minor Olympian Wind, so he kept checking the different options. Looking for the missing wind, he had also taken note of Athena's Stride, but the only difference to Valiant Rush was that it now raised overall damage and not just physical. It was already a great skill, and the synergy had only refined it slightly. While checking the different options, Seth once again looked at Subduer of Winds and finally got his answer. It seemed like minor Olympian Wind had been absorbed into the effects and strengthened them. Since the name had not changed, Seth had not noticed earlier. Subduer of Winds originally cost plus 50% to the power of wind elemental attacks, and granted wind manipulation leave 5. Now, Subduer of Wind improved wind elemental attacks by 75%, raised wind resistance by 25% and granted wind manipulation leave 7. With both boots granting the effect that meant Monique would deal 150% wind damage, have 50% higher resistance to wind attack S, and might be able to use something comparable to aerokinesis in combat. Now, the blacksmith was happy with his decision to use minor Olympian Wind. Especially considering the other changes in the set. The left boot came with the skill Wind Sickle Kick that shot out a wind blade in addition to the kick, while the set effect had gained Whirlwind Kick. The boot original skill Blizzard Leap had also changed to Athena's Boreal Ascent. It was still the same skill, but the blizzard was strengthened and could now not only slow but also freeze nearby enemies, while also dealing wind damage in a certain radius from the launch area. Overall, the boots had become a very stormy business. He would have tried them on to test the skills, but they were too small for him. While most of the armor pieces he made could be manually adjusted to kind of fit, the boots and gloves were tailor-made and he wouldn't be able to test them himself. Chapter 1428 No Teragis. Since testing the boots was out of question, Seth directly transitioned into the next pieces of the armor. He was now only missing the pauldrons and the gauntlets. Of these, the pauldrons were first, so he could customize their connection with the gauntlets. Although the blacksmith had taken a lot of inspiration from antiquity and mythology, the pauldrons were one of the pieces that were more like those of modern knights. Although Alenothorax often had shoulder protection and sometimes teragis, there was nothing comparable to the plate pauldrons Seth was making. He intended for the gauntlets to pick up the design on the boots, but Monique would be wearing full plate armor. Although the elbow was often a separate piece in history, in the context of the system, it was part of the pauldrons since the system only had a shoulder slot. The evolution of armor was similar to the move to armor boots, because there was only one slot for the feet and lower leg. As for the design of the pauldrons, Seth chose a more muted design close to some traditional armors among his blueprints. Actually, was the blacksmith intended to make something closer to spalders than pauldrons? They followed the look of skin of Athena and were more practical in this particular situation, considering the aegis. Basically, they were made up of a smooth plate that covered the shoulder and a stream of segmented armor plates running down the arm to the elbow piece that would connect to the gauntlet. The pauldrons would directly attach to the shoulder of the chain shirt. Seth had decided against a gorget during the design stage because it would have gotten in the way of the aegis functions to transform into either a cloak or a breastplate. With this design, however, the pauldrons would not get in the way, no matter how the aegis transformed. Under the heat of the pale blue spirit fire, the bard's song, and the skills of the blacksmith, several ingots of the silver metal with its golden hue quickly turned into a pair of smooth, articulate spalders. Seth evaded using leather and used sliding rivets instead to forego stretching and wear. The next step was the enchantments. This time, there was no need to change them because of the effects of the material. Both spalders raised the power of skills and magic by 50%. The right doubled the power of spear skills, while the left held the effect Wings of the Owl. Wings of the Owl lowered the user's presence by 50% and doubled their speed in the darkness and the night. Very fitting for the name. He didn't quite know why they were different this time, but he didn't mind. Neither affected the planned enchantments, so he was good. Seth decided to have the shoulders focus on improving Monique's strength, so he engraved both with minor Olympian strength, covering the smooth silver spalders and elbow caps in intricate engravings, making them look expensive and luxurious. After a quick break, he jumped to the next step. The souls he chose for the shoulders were Soul of Warrior's Strength for the left and the Soul of Berserker's Rampage for the right. The first was concentrated on all passive skills that could raise strength and physical attack power, and came with 3 passive skills. There was Simple Strikes, which raised the attack power of non-skill physical attacks by 25%. The second was Warrior's Spirit, raising strength by 20% in combat. The third was Warrior Strength, raising the strength attribute by 10 for every 10 levels of the player. The best of the 3, in Seth's opinion, was Warrior's Spirit. Although it had less use to someone on lower levels since its power was dependent on the base value of the attribute, it was powerful for someone like Monique, who was already past level 100 and focused her attributes on strength and agility. Soul of Berserker's Rampage combined all the active skills of the same elements. This was probably where the name came from. This one had a trait and 2 skills. Berserker's Blood Rush was a trait with 2 effects. Passively, it raised strength by 10% when armed and gave a passive skill of the same name. Berserker's Blood Rush stacked an additional 10 strength for every armed attack that hit. Each instance of a stack lasted 60 seconds. This meant the user had 60 seconds to stack up as much strength as they could. How much they could get depended on their attack speed and ability to hit their target. The 2 skills of the soul were Warrior Strike and Warrior's Attack. The first was a typical iteration of skills that momentarily raise attack power when attacking. The bonus of 500% attack power on the next strike was the only thing slightly above average. The second was another passive skill that raised the power of all skills performed with a weapon by 15%. Of the effect of the second soul, Seth especially liked the trait. The only thing he found a little missing was the power that made a berserker a berserker. They were supposed to grow stronger the lower their health was and receive some kind of healing or life-steal effect to stay in that state. It was probably missing because this was just the rush and not the full class. Although he had started the day off by finishing the boots, there were no interruptions or unforeseen circumstances today, so the blacksmith blazed through the production and could start with the enchanting of the soul armaments. For the left shoulder, he followed his idea of doubling down on Olympian enchantments, engraving the soul armament with minor Olympian strength. On the sole of the right shoulder, he chose one of the Leave 3 enchantments he could only use once per loadout. Inspired by the name of the soul, he enchanted it with basic Olympian healing, an enchantment that raised the multiplier of health regeneration per endurance and the basic health regeneration by 50%. Originally, he had intended to maybe place it on a ring or necklace at a later point, when Monique decided to update her accessories. However, having special Olympian silver like this for the armor, almost necessitated that he used the better ones on it, rather than keep them back for other items Monique may wear. He had been arguing with himself before and decided spontaneously, since had already dropped the idea of doubling down on the enchantments in other places. Since it was the sole armament, he wouldn't have to worry about a visual difference either. Basic Olympian healing, like most of the basic ones, was a little more intricate than the minor ones and would have looked very different if engraved on the silver. With the decision made, Seth managed to finish the soul armaments in the late evening, staying on schedule despite starting later and finishing the boots first. As the day neared its end, he infused the souls into the spaulders and dunked the spaulders into the water of Styx. Ding! You have finished a special item. Plus 100p of power of existence x2. Ding! Your item has changed because of a synergy between materials and powers. Ding! Your item has changed because of a synergy between materials. The blacksmith barely had a chance to hear the notifications when they were overshadowed by a sudden shout that echoed in the workshop. I got it! We got it! She shouted as she kicked open the door, visibly overjoyed. Seth was puzzled for a moment, but there was only one thing Monique would be this excited about. You got the location of a gorgon? He asked, carefully playing the spaulders on the closest workbench. Yes. Our contact in Gula finally responded. Snakes for hair, ugly mug, turn people into stone with a look, it's totally our target, the chosen of Athena explained. Her words kept getting jumbled because she spoke so fast. It was hard to understand, but Seth caught the important bits. Okay, I get. We have a proper lead. Let's calm down and talk in detail. Chapter 1429 Perch of Nictamine. Next day. It's a trip. It's a trip. Finn cheered as they all got their thing read for their trip to Perarian. Their representatives had looked up the info after Jane had contacted them. Apparently, there was a monster fitting the description of a gorgon, however, the information the Parakan Empire had was limited. About 1 year ago, the Empire had lost all contact with a place called the Ok Archipelago. From the stories of the survivors, they concluded that it was a dungeon break event. Several high-level dungeons broke at once, flooding the group of islands with monsters. They had launched several scouting expeditions to find out more, but none returned. The couple of ships that managed to escape the initial event were the last source of information on what happened at the archipelago. One of the most terrifying stories the survivors brought back talked of a creature with snakes for hair that was able to turn people into statues. It had wreaked havoc, turning public streets into museums of marble statues with a single glance. Now this was a story from over a year ago, but it was currently their best bet. After Jane informed their representative of their plans, the other side quickly started preparing. Although there were diplomatic concerns, the Empire was more than happy to welcome them. Why wouldn't they? Minas Mar offered to send some of their strongest to explore the archipelago they had lost contact with and were unable to reach themselves. With both sides eager to send Minas Mar's expedition to the Ok archipelago, things moved very quickly, and their departure was set for today in the evening. So, while they prepared the travel of their illustrious guests, the blacksmith also had to start packing quickly. Seth needed to come along to harvest the soul of the beast. When he told Mina and Finn about it, the conversation somehow ended with the decision that all of them were going together. Now, all three of them were packing stuff like it was a vacation. Do you think I need a bathing suit? Mina asked, holding up a bikini she had from who knows where. They were treating it more like a holiday to catch a break than a dangerous adventure. It is called an archipelago, so it should have beaches, right? Seth, did you hear about how warm that place is? Finn tried to answer Mina's question. Well, I think Jane mentioned that it was a tourism spot, but aren't you guys forgetting something? The whole place is filled with monsters. I doubt we will get a chance to go swimming at the beach, Seth argued, although he also secretly packed some trunks. If there are a bunch of monsters, we just have to kill them, Mina said confidently, ready to carve out some beach time. If it had to be carved out of monster flesh and blood, even better. I guess you are not wrong, Seth agreed with a shrug. If the place was dangerous, they just had to make it safe. With that in mind, he also grabbed a small sphere of what looked like dark, polished wood from the vault and put it in his pack. A couple of hours later, the team, now consisting of Mina, Finn, Monique, and Seth, assembled in the entrance hall of the magic tower. They were all in full gear. Mina wore her new leather armor, Finn her new accessories, and Monique wore the almost completed regalia of Athena. The only things the chosen of the war goddess were missing now were her gauntlets and the aegis. On that note, she was quite happy with the development of the armor so far. Even though it was not finished yet, it was already better than her previous relic-rated set. Looking at her wearing the finished parts, Seth found that the whole thing was really coming together. The spalders and the shirt of plate and mail looked especially good together. The left was called the perch of Nyctamine, while the right was the shoulder of Athena. Now it made sense why the left had wings of the owl, it was the shoulder where Athena's owl was usually seated, so it gained a different power and name than its mirror image on the other shoulder. Not only did their names differ, but they were also not their own subset. Although that meant there was no set effect between the two, they were strong in their own ways. He was quite happy with his gamble on the synergies. The doubling down on minor Olympian strength had created the effect of Might of Athena, which raised strength by 250 and the PHYS attack multiplier by 5 for every point of strength. It had also gained the effect Practice of Athena. Practice of Athena was like a mix of simple strikes and warrior's spirit. The effect raised the power of armed attacks in combat by 50%, as long as the weapon handling skill for the weapon was expert or above. For someone like Monique, who even got the class of Spear Demon, it was obvious that she cleared that condition with ease, at least for the spear. The changes to Perch of Nyctamine were already great, but that was not the end. Shoulder of Athena had also improved compared to the effects Seth could have expected. Surprisingly, minor Olympian strength and basic Olympian health had fused into Athena's health. An effect that raised strength by 150 points, endurance by 50, health regeneration by 65% and raised the multiplier for health regen per endurance by 30%. Although Monique didn't originally excel in the self-recovery sector, like Jonah, for example, with this she could recover from almost anything given some time. Unless someone burned off a limb or directly decapitated her, she would probably be fine. Apart from that, there was another new effect, simply called Blood Stride. It seemed to have been influenced by Berserker's Blood Rush, the skill that was granted by the trait. When walking on a field of battle, where the ground was drenched with blood, the wearer's strength would increase by 10% and their attack power by 25%. The skill really fit a goddess of war, even when Athena was usually described as a little milder than Ares. Apart from that, the two skills the souls brought with them had also changed. Warrior Strike had turned into Athena's Wrathful Strike, doubling its power. Now the power of the next attack would be multiplied by 10. Warrior's Attack, which raised the power of all skills performed with a weapon by 15%, became Weapon Handling of Athena and raised the power by 30% now. Although Seth's own skills and luck were also playing into the mix, the overall improvements to the skills were still moderately unhinged. Wouldn't it have been better to finish the armor before setting off? Mina suddenly asked, looking at the only blemish currently sticking to Monique's body. Since the gauntlets were yet to be done, Monique had to wear a substitute pair. She had gotten a pair of epic gauntlets from the guild vault, because they were better than her old relic-rated gloves without their set effect. However, ignoring their performance, they were stained black by the dungeon power that influenced the item and looked garish in comparison to the rest of her current armor. I get what you mean, but no need to worry. I will finish the gauntlets by the time we see proper action, the blacksmith said carefree. Oh, so you are going to do it on the way, like in the good old times? Finn asked, excited for another chance to watch Seth craft on the go. Wait, you are going to make my gloves on the way there? Then why didn't you stop me from exchanging these substitutes? Monique asked, feeling a little betrayed. It's not a bad idea to be prepared, in case something happens on the way, right? Seth said with a shrug, as if they intended to leave the fighting to Monique alone, while some of the strongest fighters of Minas Mar kicked back and watched her. Although it sounded ridiculous, Monique couldn't help but feel that this was exactly their intention. Then let's hope nothing happens during the journey, she said with a meek smile. Perch of Nyctamine. Special. Regalia of Athena set 1/X. Physical DEF, 1600. Mag, Def, 1900. Durability 9000. 1 Wings of the Owl. 2 plus 50% power on skills and spells. 3 40% damage reflection. 4 Might of Athena. 5 Practice of Athena. 6 Passive skill, Simple Strikes. 7 Passive skill, Warrior's Spirit. 8 Passive skill, Warrior Strength. Regalia of Athena, to be updated. 1 of 2 spalders filled with the Might of Athena. It was created by Master Smith, the first Master Blacksmith and Master Enchanter of Earth. Using mysterious and divine means, he created an item to empower those blessed by the goddess. Requirements: Blessing of Athena, Master Smith. Shoulder of Athena. Special. Regalia of Athena set 1/X. Physical DEF, 1600. Mag, Def, 1900. Durability 9000. 1 double the power of spear skills. 2 plus 50% power on skills and spells. 3 40% damage reflection. 4 Athena's health. 5 blood stride. 6 trait, Berserker's blood rush. 7 active skill, Athena's wrathful strike 10x damage on next attack. 8 passive skill, weapon practice of Athena 25% to all skill with a weapon. Regalia of Athena, to be updated. 1 of 2 spalders filled with the might of Athena. It was created by Master Smith, the first Master Blacksmith and Master Enchanter of Earth. Using mysterious and divine means, he created an item to empower those blessed by the goddess. Requirements: Blessing of Athena, Master Smith. Chapter 1430 Through the Cave. With everyone in the entrance hall, they had a short briefing before setting off. They all teleport from the magic tower directly in front of the Hell Gate that led to Perarian, or rather, the dark cave system stretching below the surface of some frontier region. The caves had changed considerably since the last time Seth had been here. Magic lights were attached at even distances along the walls, properly illuminating the whole cavern where the gate was situated. Seth had intended to act a little cool and use one of the demon cantrips to create a swarm of floating flames that illuminated the area and attacked any hostiles. That was thoroughly thwarted by the great development the caves had gone through. Crates and boxes of ores were being piled up everywhere, by the busy mining golem Seth had built a long while ago. It was no different anywhere else in the cave system. Golems and miners were harvesting the ore deposits that Seth and Al had scouted the first time. Even more were found during the exploration of the system. One could say that the scary demon cave that used to spew out monsters to terrorize the world above had completely turned into one of Minas Mar's corporate ventures. Of course, all without the knowledge of the people actually living in this land. How else were they supposed to trade these ores for food, if the locals thought they had some kind of claim on the mining rights? The group of 4 followed the fully developed main tunnel of the system, which directly led them to the exit on the surface. Their journey, riding Vagr and Drichtum the Golem Griffins, took less than an hour. While it was early evening in Minas Mar, they were greeted by a bright day in Perarian. The fort is over there. Jane said we will be welcomed there by the Perican ambassador, who will accompany us while traveling through the Empire. Their presence will also allow us to use the Imperial teleportation system, Monique said out loud, which they already knew. Teleportation? Finn asked doubtfully. They had a quick briefing before leaving, but it was good that Monique repeated it again, since Finn had not listened. At least this information seemed absolutely new to the fairy brute. Yet, apparently they have a whole network of ancient teleport stations that allow quick travel across this continent. Seth summarized what he read in the reports from the expedition. Cool, but when do we get to see the mechs? I mean the Titans, the fairy, who was terribly influenced by TV cartoons, asked excitedly. Finn had been binge-watching animated movies and series of Earth in her freedom, learning the term mech and developing an infatuation with the topic. They have some small ones at the fort, but they can't compare to the ones we saw at the capital, or the arena, Monique readily told her, not without bragging about her own experiences in this place. Not everything that happened here was negative. Do you think they will let me pilot one? Finn asked excitedly. I doubt it. These things are military assets of great importance, at least for them. You wouldn't have any fun, since you are way stronger than anything they have here, Monique explained with a wry smile. She wasn't lying, she was convinced the fairy could scrap even dungeon busters with ease. Didn't you say they have better ones in the capital? Maybe one of those, her question trailed off. When I said here, I meant the whole continent, Finn. Not just the small fort, Monique explained apologetically. However, it didn't even faze Finn, who suddenly turned left. On their left side, Mina and Seth were riding Vagr through the sky. Seth. I want a Titan I can use for fun. Can you make me one? She suddenly shouted at the blacksmith, who had listened to the whole conversation at the side and hoped this question wouldn't come up. He was a traditionalist. Just like he found Nico Boo's infatuation with superhero suits not fitting for the times they lived in, he also disliked the thought of mechs running around everywhere. Although he acknowledged Epistlan's mix of technology and magic, he never wanted to contribute to the disruption of the sword and magic kind of aesthetics that came with the system. Now, his own fiancée asked him to break the taboo. Seth stayed silent for a while, his thoughts and doubts battling each other, until he finally found a loophole for this conundrum. Fine, but all design choices belong to me and you can't complain or ask for design changes, he said wittily. This way, he left himself a way not to make a cartoon mech. Their conversation ended there as they closed in on the fort at the exit. There was some commotion on and before the walls as they got closer. It was Seth's first time seeing the titans of this world, as they assembled in front of the wall to defend it against the monsters that had just emerged. They actually just looked like massive knights in shoddy armor. Since there was no system assistance in this place, he couldn't get anything usable from appraising them, but at this point, he had enough experience to make his own judgment, and he was moderately impressed. It was an achievement to create something like this from mostly common materials. It was a testimony of how far advanced the magic in this place actually was. Even when it was not strong, it was elaborate, like science. He was looking forward to seeing the more advanced version, if these were just old phase-out models. The closest comparison Seth had to something on Earth was the power armors of Epsilon, but these old models still wouldn't stand a chance against Jonia's Magi tech. We are the emissaries of Minas Mar. Monique introduced them succinctly. There was no need to go into detail. The Empire did not need to know that the part was mostly made up of the leader and his first ladies of Minas March. The commotion on the walls quickly subsided when they realized that there were people riding the monsters that had just emerged from the demon cave. The commander actually seemed excited and was waving at them. "We have already been waiting for you, Lady Monique," the commander shouted his greeting. The men on the walls had already lowered all weapon systems, and the titans returned back inside the fortification when Vagrandrijdom crossed the walls and landed in the inner court. Apparently, there had been an urgent correspondence in the early morning, informing of Minas Mar's emissaries. The reason they still acted like monsters emerged was simply to follow protocol. There was no reason to become complacent. A welcome dinner and their quarters were already prepared for them. However, their journey would have to take a pause. Since everything happened on such short notice, the Emperor's aide who would accompany them had yet to arrive. "I'm sorry, but the royal aide will only arrive tomorrow morning at the earliest," the commander apologized. "Couldn't we meet them on the way to the Imperial Gate?" Monique asked. When they came here the first time, they had traveled to Blackfeather, the capital of Clow Country, to then teleport to the imperial capital, Port Gula. She had expected to take the same path again. "It's a little different this time. His Majesty authorized the use of gate artifacts for your party. The aide is on his way to bring them here. They will allow you to travel instantly to the nearest gate in Blackfeather," the commander explained proudly, as if it were he who received the honor to use them. "So we have to wait until tomorrow to move on?" Seth asked to summarize what that meant for them. "I'm afraid so, but it will shorten your overall travel time tremendously. The aide will be able to tell you more about your travel route once they arrive," the commander confirmed. "Great, then you please prepare a big, empty room for me," the blacksmith asked for a place to work with a smile.